If you're in the mood for an Asian comfort food dish that practically makes itself, you're in the right place. In consideration of everyone's food allergies and this terrible economy that we're living in 2024, we will be limiting ourselves to using allergen-friendly ingredients and a cheaper cut of meat. By using these garden vegetables that can also be found in the store and a variety of spices, this dish will definitely go to the next level, and I know that it's going to become a family favorite at your house as well. This is the star of the show. It's a chuck roast. To start with, I'm going to prepare my vegetables ahead of time by slicing my bell peppers in half, removing the seeds, and then I will further dice them and put them in a bowl. Do consider that our chuck roast will be cooking in the Instapot for an hour and 30 minutes, so if you're in a rush, just be sure to do that part first before you prepare your vegetables, as they will be cooked separately. Here we are, so we have some lovely garden beans. I'm taking off the fibrous stems off the ends of them and chopping them into 2-inch sections. It really doesn't matter what kind of green beans you choose to use, just as long as they're fresh and that you like them. When I don't have access to fresh garden beans, I use the Costco brand of French green beans. I really enjoy those, and I get them every time for a lot of my dishes. This meal is definitely an awesome set it and forget it meal. When I want to spend more time with my family over the weekend, this is the type of dish that I'm making. I throw something in the Instapot and we all come back hungry from doing whatever it is we were doing to expect a really delicious meal to be prepared and ready to go. I'm chopping up half a white onion for this recipe. Generally, I would use more than half of an onion. I'd use like a whole big onion, but this is all I had on hand, so just do what works for you. Next up, we're moving it over to the stove and we're heating about 2 tablespoons of sesame oil. We're adding a splash of avocado oil to that, and then we're going to cook up the onions we just chopped. So we're going to want to caramelize them a bit, so add a little brown sugar if that is in your liking. But for us, we will be skipping that part today, and we will be just caramelizing the onions without adding any additional sugar to them. As mentioned previously, I did use sesame oil in this recipe. If you or a loved one has an allergy, be sure to omit that and use a different type of oil. Olive oil or avocado oil will work just fine. To start seasoning our meat, we're going to add a dash of cumin to it. It's going to equal to be about 1 teaspoon of cumin for this 2 pounds of chuck roast. And for my next ingredient, please bear with me. This is everything bagel seasoning, and yes, it's going to go right on top of the meat and it's going to be delicious. I joke not when I say that everything bagel seasoning goes well with just about everything. Do consider that everything bagel seasoning has sesame seeds in it, so if you can't have those, please omit this part of the recipe. For about 2 pounds of chuck roast, you will use about half a tablespoon of black pepper, and then I will follow that with about 1 tablespoon of paprika seasoning. I'm just eyeballing the garlic here, but this is about a tablespoon of garlic for this 2 pounds of chuck roast. And then I will be adding just a little bit of chili powder to the top of all that. I'll only be adding about 2 teaspoons of chili powder to this dish. My toddler doesn't like things super spicy, so I want to make sure that she enjoys this one as well. And for the star of the show, I'll be using 1/4 cup of duck fat right on top of this meat. This is really the key ingredient in making sure that your meat turns out to be extremely tender and flavorful. Some may call me brave, others may call me foolish, but I'm just kind of eyeballing the salt in this recipe. So I added a tablespoon of salt to my salting dish, and I started salting my recipe, and then I remembered that I also added everything bagel seasoning, which does have some sodium in it, so I decided to not put the rest of the salt, and this actually turned out perfectly. But be sure to undersalt your meat as opposed to oversalting it. You could always add a little bit of salt later at the end. But you definitely want to consider that you've added bagel seasoning to your dish already. Before I put this away for an hour and a half to be tenderized in the Instapot, I'm going to give it a really good stir to make sure that the seasonings are covering my meat very well. And as you can see, the meat looks absolutely beautiful. It's coated with my spices, and it's almost ready to go into the Instapot. The meat is almost ready to go. We just need to add 3 more ingredients to the Instapot before we press start. Next, I'm adding this anchovy fish sauce to the meat. Thankfully, my daughter is not allergic to anchovies, even though she's allergic to practically every fish except for that and tuna. If you have an anchovy fish allergy, just be sure to substitute it for a few splashes of Worcestershire sauce instead. Once my onions are a little bit browned and finished cooking, I'm going to add a little speck of salt to them, and then I will add them to my Instapot along with the meat. Finally, add 1 cup of water to the Instapot to make sure that our meat does not burn while cooking. Set the Instapot to 1 hour and 30 minutes on high pressure, and then get back to preparing your vegetables. I'm adding my green beans to a hot pan of avocado and sesame oil, and I'm using the same seasonings that I used on the meat earlier in order to add flavor to the vegetables. I apologize for the lack of the visual, but you will be adding the bell peppers to this pan once the beans are cooked after about 5 minutes, and then stir those peppers in for another 2-3 minutes until they absorb the spices. This is the package of vermicelli noodles that I'll be using. Out of the 8 servings, I will only be using 4 of them, so that makes it to be 2.5 cups of noodles for this recipe. After 1.5 hours, your meat should be done cooking in the Instapot. You could either manually release the pressure by pushing the knob in the back or allowing it to naturally release. Look at all this delicious flavor happening in the pot. We just need some noodles to soak it all up. In order to add our noodles, we'll be adding 5 cups of water and 2.5 cups of vermicelli noodles. This recipe will yield 6 very generous servings, and this is the actual rice noodle bag I'm using. So out of the 8 servings on here, I'm only using 4 of them because I only need 2.5 cups of noodles to 7 cups of total liquid. Once your Instapot pressurizes and beeps after 1 minute of cooking, you will pop it open by manually releasing the pressure, and you will add your veggies to it. So after 1 minute of cooking and manually releasing the pressure, this is how your noodle and meat mixture is going to look. And of course, it is missing some beautiful color from those vegetables, so you could just add the vegetables directly to the pot at this point. If your vegetables have cooled too much on the pan at this point, feel free to reheat them on the stove if they've gone too cold, but really the meat sauce and everything here should heat them up quite nicely as long as you give them a good careful stir with maybe a pair of chopsticks or something that won't break our noodles.